Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PTA Basics Training. I'm Sue Solomon, your Council President, and today we will be joined by Heather Ippolito, Council Executive Vice President, Aaron Hester, our 34th District PTA President and your President-elect for Santa Clarita Council, and Leslie Powell, Santa Clarita EVP-elect and your President-elect for the 34th District. So today we're going to concentrate on a few different items that are basic to your knowledge of PTA in order for you to smoothly operate your organization. We'll go over some PTA history and its purpose. We'll review the structure of the organization so you understand the different levels of PTA, responsibilities for being part of the officer or chair people for your unit, and your unit is your school PTA, the role of the principal. We'll discuss nominations and elections, membership, convention, PTA finances. So after you've viewed this training, if you have any questions, please feel free to email any one of the members of the SCV Council PTA leadership team. And we will get back to you as soon as possible. A brief history of PTA. So the PTA is the oldest child advocacy organization in the world. It was organized February 17th, 1897. Two of the women that you see in this picture, Alice McClellan Burney and Phoebe Apperson Hearst, worked really hard to better the environment for children. At the time that they began to form the PTA, children were in factories. They weren't necessarily in school. Children died young of childhood diseases, and there was a lot of hunger. And so these two women organized what became at first the National Congress of Mothers. And over 2,000 people had gathered in Washington, D.C. In 1897 to form this organization. And over the next 20 years, there became 37 chapters of the PTA throughout the United States. In 1926, Selena Sloan Butler began her work for the betterment of, at the time, colored people, with all of the indignities that they were going through. She worked to better the environment for children, and she organized the National Congress of Colored Parents and Teachers Association. Now, all three of these women became very active at a time when women did not have the right to vote and when there was the Jim Crow laws. So together they merged in 1970 and worked really hard on behalf of children across the United States and eventually around the world where we had our military bases to better their opportunities to live a healthy life. So through their efforts, through your efforts, and because of them, these are the kinds of things that PTA still works towards today. Historically, they were the ones who put kindergarten on the map. So that's why we have kindergarten, thanks to the PTA. Public health, safety, child labor laws, the juvenile justice system, mandatory immunization, arts and education. All of these topics today are PTAs still advocate for in Washington, D.C. and in our home states. So when we come to you as council and say, hey, anybody interested in being an advocacy chair? It's because there's still so many things to advocate in our community. And today, with all of the changes we're all experiencing through the pandemic, advocacy has never been stronger amongst our parents in the Santa Clarita Valley. Next. So the mission and statement of the California PTA is to truly strengthen the connection between home, school, community, and a place of worship. And it's all about the welfare of children. So we work to raise the standards of home life, to secure adequate laws for the care and protection of children and youth, to bring closer together, as I said, the cooperation, the partnership between parents and teachers, and to develop between educators and the general public such united efforts as will secure for all children and youth the highest advantages in physical, mental, social, and spiritual education. I highly recommend that you take a look at that mission statement at your executive board meetings and even at your association meeting, at least maybe twice a year, bring it up so that we can remind our members what we are working towards. Organizational structure of the PTA. So you, in your schools, you're known as the unit PTA. You are the grassroots of the organization. You are for whom the national, state, district, and council PTA work. So our units, our school PTAs, you check in with the council, and the council brings information for you from the district, who brings information from the state, who brings information from the national. So there's a chain that where we get our information from. If you have questions at your unit level, then you go and ask your council board members, council officers, I have a question, could you please provide help? We also do training at council, obviously, right? District is where we go at the council to say, hey, we have these concerns and they're multiple, so we need some more in-depth answers related to these questions. Can you help us? And then the district PTA also does training. So we train and the district trains. And then you have the state PTA. That's the chapter of the PTA we belong to within the national PTA. And national and state PTA, just like us, have association meetings. And there is for you, that's your convention. So when you hear about convention, know that that is something that you ought to attend, because it's the point in time when things have become issues or concerns of a community. We have an opportunity through various processes to advocate and create advocacy position statements so that state and national can work in Washington, D.C. So you guys at your unit, you operate to plan programs and activities to meet the needs of your community and your families, and you carry out the purpose of PTA. Council supports the training for our local PTAs, that's you. And the district PTA organizes and strengthens units and councils and provides channels of information from the state and national PTA.
Okay, and we are going to go just a little bit more in depth into different areas of your PTA and what makes up your unit PTA. So within your unit PTA, you have an executive board, which is made up of your elected officers, chair people, principal, sometimes a staff member or a student representative, depending on the makeup of your unit. The executive board is required to meet monthly. Every single unit has an executive board, and every single executive board is required to meet monthly. During those executive board meetings, you will work to create recommendations to bring to the association for approval. You'll do things like planning a budget and a calendar. You're responsible for keeping track of all of the financial transactions, And every single person on your board needs to be aware of all of those financial transactions and make sure that you understand everything that is happening. If there are any vacancies on your board, and we know that sometimes elections happen and people either have to resign for personal reasons or they move and a vacancy is created, it is the responsibility of the executive board to appoint people to those vacancies and also to appoint committee members. And your executive board is made up of a president, a secretary, a treasurer, an auditor, a historian, and a parliamentarian. And then beyond that, they can look a little bit different from unit to unit. You need to look into your bylaws to see exactly which officers are included in your executive board. You could find things like an executive vice president, VPs for membership, or ways and means, fundraising, programs, financial secretaries. It just is dependent upon what is written in your bylaws. After all that hard work is done in your executive board meetings, all of those recommendations are taken from your executive board to your association. Your association is everybody else in your PTA at your school. So any member that has joined is a part of your association. Your meetings for association meetings happen according to your bylaws. Some units do meet monthly, just like they meet executive board monthly. Some might meet every other month. Some might meet 3, 4, 5 times a year. It just depends on what you as an association have decided. So check your bylaws to see exactly when you're meeting. And it is the association that provides the direction for the organization. So although the executive board seems to be doing all of the in-depth work, none of the things that the executive board discusses or recommends can happen until your association says that they can happen. And at those association meetings, when you vote on these recommendations, members who have been members, have been paid members for at least 30 days can vote. Everybody else is just kind of there to watch and listen, but you can only speak and you can only vote if you are a member. And the association is the one that elects the nominating committee and the officers. Then on a smaller scale, you have committees. Committees are the ones that do all the legwork for different events and fundraisers and things like that. So members are appointed to the committees by the executive board, and they work on one specific thing, like a fall festival or a dance or a fun run or something like that. Those committees do all of the work to plan out the activity, and they bring their suggestions to the executive board where a bigger discussion can take place, and then recommendations can be made from there. Standing committees are committees that meet all year long. Things that might be a standing committee are things like yearbook, box tops, things like that, whereas short-term committees meet just for a shorter amount of time and then they disband. So it might be a one-time thing like a winter breakfast or a dance or Red Ribbon Week. All of the expenditures for your programs and events must ultimately be approved by the association before any spending can occur. So the committees can make suggestions, the executive board can make those recommendations, but ultimately the association is the one that needs to approve any expenditures that are being required. Another important part of a PTA is the principal. The role of the principal is to help the PTA feel welcome and help connect the parent community with the staff. They could help your PTA with parent education. It's a really great idea to have the PTA president attend staff meetings occasionally. Sometimes some principals like the president to come once a month. Sometimes they'll go like kind of quarterly or by report card grading periods. Sometimes they'll go at the beginning of the year and halfway through. Just depends on what works best for your staff. But it's a really great idea to go to at least the first staff meeting of the year and introduce the board and the calendar and things like that. The principal also would be responsible for thanking volunteers and presenting a report to both your executive board and association at your meetings. That's also a very good draw for an association meeting in particular. If you advertise that the principal will be there and be giving a report, a lot of members will like to come because they like to hear from the principal and hear what exactly is happening at the school. And the principal also serves as an advisor on your executive board and for your nominating committee. And they have a basic understanding of your PTA budget and goals and can help guide you. Here's a quick comparison between your PTA president and your principal. So your PTA president is kind of like the CEO of your PTA, responsible for the PTA leadership, chairing and planning the PTA meetings. They are the ones who run the actual meetings. They coordinate the PTA programs so that they align with school and district policies. They make sure that all PTA policies and procedures are followed, and they represent PTA at council meetings and district meetings. Whereas the principal is the CEO of the building, responsible for things that occur in the school and managing the staff and the building and complying with ed code and school district policies and regulations. Together, you can build a strong team, but the most important part of that is to have a strong line of communication. Work hand in hand with your principal to schedule things, to make requests, always be respectful of one another, find ways to promote parent involvement, and find ways to support the curriculum and school programs. It's really, really important to build those positive relationships, because then you will appear as a team and have a stronger voice for everybody.
All right, so we are moving on to nominations and elections. So this is a really important part of PTA, and this is one of those areas where we find a lot of confusion. So we want to help you so that there is no confusion when it comes time for your nominating committee and your elections. So want to point out that your nominating committee is elected, not selected, elected at an association meeting. Your principal, which Leslie just got done talking about, serves as an advisor to this committee. If your principal isn't available, they can appoint either the assistant principal or a teacher as their liaison to this committee. But you really need someone on the school staff, because they know a lot of parents and can help guide you in the right direction as you are trying to fill the slate. Good news for all you PTA presidents out there, you do not sit on this committee. You may not, per the bylaws. So this is one of those times as a president, you put your hands up and you say, I'm not going to serve on this. Your bylaws will help the nominating committee determine what offices need to be filled, and it also lets you know how many people sit on this committee. So a lot of units do 3 members and 1 alternate. Some do 5 members and 2 alternates for the nominating committee. But if you served on the nominating committee last time, you can't do it again this time. So this is one of those, you have to do it either every other year, or you cannot sit on this committee every year. Nomination committees should be diverse, because we want parents of all grade levels, of all genders, of all ethnicities. It's really important that our PTA board reflects our school population. And so we want to make sure that we have a diverse group leading us. The nominating committee is charged with creating that slate of candidates. So like I said, they go to the bylaws, they see what positions are elected that we need to fill, and then they set about trying to find the right people to fill those spots. It's really important to note that what happens inside this committee is completely confidential, because sometimes we do have to have challenging conversations about candidates and about whether or not they would be good fits for positions. And the last thing that we would want to have happen is for that information to get leaked out and heard out of context. So everything that happens within the nominating committee is confidential. And the nominating committee must publish the slate at least 28 days prior to elections, which means they need to be elected well in advance of that. You need to give your nominating committee enough time to meet and talk about what kind of things we need for the board, what kind of skills we need, what kind of, how are we going to advertise, how are we going to get the word out. You need time for them to talk to the candidates. If they're going to do an application or an interview, you need time for all those things to happen. And then they need to have that slate of candidates posted at least 28 days prior to elections. Now, folks, the nominating committee doesn't end once that slate is posted. This is really important. The nominating committee meets and continues to be an active committee right up until elections. So whether someone resigns and says, you know what, I'm now moving out of state and I can no longer do that position, or if you had a vacant position that you didn't think you could find someone for, and now all of a sudden Sue Solomon shows up and she's like, I would love to be your treasurer. And you're like, that's great, Sue, you would be the best treasurer ever. I say that because Sue does not like being treasurer. But, if there's a vacancy and you can still find someone to fill that, the nominating committee continues to meet right up until that election meeting. So they can continue to make changes to that slate. But the slate does need to be published 28 days prior to the election to give folks a chance to decide whether or not they're going to run off the floor. Now, when it comes time for your elections, they usually happen in spring. So usually March, April, May is kind of late, but it's usually in that zone. Check your bylaws to see exactly when. Your president presides over the elections. They are the chair of the election meeting. There is a lovely script that they follow. Part of that script, you will read the bylaws, which is always my favorite part. I got to do it last night in a meeting, always my favorite part. The chair of the nominating committee reads the slate. They get to present the slate of officers. And the parliamentarian, obviously, they're the ones who get that lucky job of reading the bylaws. Like I said, there's a great script. It walks you through every single step of how to do things. It's beautiful. It's on the California State PTA website, or you can email our council parliamentarian or any of us, and we can get that for you. There are allowed to be nominations from the floor. This is really important. Just because there's a slate doesn't mean that those people are automatically going to be the officers. You have to open it up to the floor, because if there is someone who thinks that they could do a better job than one of the officers, or feels like they didn't get due consideration, maybe they had put their name in for one of the offices and they don't feel like the nominating committee really considered them, they get to still nominate themselves from the floor. Now, we suggest if there's going to be a race, if you're going to have more than one person run for a position, that you give them each a minute to share why. Why are you wanting to be this officer? It helps to have everybody, before they vote, to have some sense of, who do we want to vote for? Voting by proxy is not allowed. This is really important. So in my family, I'm a PTA member of my daughter's school. My husband is, and my daughter. There are 3 of us. But let's say that my husband and my daughter are busy and they can't come to the meeting. I don't get to vote 3 times because there are 3 people in my household who have PTA memberships. It's 1 person, 1 vote. So if my husband was able to attend the meeting, he would get his vote and I would get mine, but I don't get to take their votes for them and say, oh, I know that they would have voted for Sue because she's amazing. That's not allowed. So voting by proxy is not allowed. Now, some people say, oh my gosh, we're voting digitally. Isn't that by proxy? No. Heather Ippolito gets 1 vote in this digital Zoom meeting. Sue Solomon gets 1 vote in this digital Zoom meeting. Same with Aaron and Leslie. Aaron can't vote on behalf of her husband in this digital Zoom meeting unless he happens to be sitting right next to her. So that is different. That's not proxy. Digital voting is something we're dealing with now that's different. In order to vote, as Leslie said, you have to be a PTA member for 30 days. So you need to have that membership list handy to know who's been a member for 30 days and who hasn't. Voice vote is only allowed if there's only one candidate per office. So if we are going to have 2 people, we must have a ballot. But it's important to remember that people could call for a ballot vote at any time. So you need to make sure that you are prepared, either with those paper ballots or those digital ballots, to have a ballot vote at your elections. So want to remind you that in a meeting, whether it's an election meeting or just a regular meeting, there are 5 ways to vote. The first is a voice vote. And ladies, this is your chance to participate with me. A voice vote sounds like this. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no.
No.
Very good. You guys are well trained. That's a voice vote. We listen where there are more ayes than no's, and then whichever has the greater number, we go with that direction. We could also do a show of hands vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. And that could either be an actual hand, or in a Zoom, it could be a digital hand. You could do a show of hands vote. Count the hands. Okay, that's how many ayes we have. Count how many no's. See which has more. We go with that. My personal favorite, which everybody knows, is a roll call vote. A roll call vote is you take that membership list and you go down and you call each person by name and you ask them to vote. So in our little meeting here, alphabetically, it would be Erin Hester, what is your vote? And she would say what her vote is. And then Heather Ablito, what's your vote? And then Leslie Powell, what's your vote? And then Sue Solomon, what's your vote? And we would go person by person by person and each vote. It takes a very long time. It's not the most popular thing. I usually say it as a joke, but it is a way that you can vote if you are worried about consensus. A ballot vote, we've talked about that. Even if it's something in your executive board or your association meeting that you're worried might be contentious, you can do a ballot vote. Just have little pieces of paper if you're in person, or a Google form if you're virtual, and have people write down yes or no instead of raising their hand or saying it. If you're worried that people aren't going to say how they really feel, call for a ballot vote and be ready for that. The last one is my favorite. Well, besides roll call, is general consent. This oftentimes will save you a little bit of time in your meetings. So if we're talking about something that we are all in favor of, something really cool that everybody, when they're talking about it in debate and discussion, we're all like, yes, 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 then the president doesn't need to do voice vote or hand count or anything like that. They can just say, by acclamation or by general consent, the motion passes. If everybody in the room is like, woo, let's do it, there's no need to do any of those other ways to vote. You can just do it by general consent. All right. So I think this is still me. Is this still me? I think it's still me. PTA has lots of benefits to being a member. We all know that one of the greatest benefits is that sense that you are doing something great for children and families, whether it's the children and families in your school, in your community, in your state, or in your country. We are doing good things for kids. But there are also other benefits to being a member. We have the National PTA Reflections Program, which is an art program that has been around for over 50 years now, that gives students a chance to participate in the arts and be recognized for it. So they can take photographs, choreograph a dance, create a musical composition, write a story, do a picture. There are all sorts of different things that they can do, but this is only for our PTA schools. So this is one of the great benefits that your unit can take advantage of by having a PTA on your campus. We also have amazing insurance coverage. So every PTA across the state of California, we all have insurance together, which means we have that collective buying power for some really great deals. What you may not realize is booster clubs and PACs and PT others, they have to pay for insurance for every different program that they do. So for the Harvest Festival, they would buy one insurance policy. For their book fair, they would buy another. For their fundraiser, they would buy another. To cover their board, they would buy another. And they would have to do all of those things individually. We give you a lovely package that is less than $300 a year, right now, and it covers all of your volunteers, your board, your events, all of that. And so that is a great benefit for being a PTA. We have a ton of parent resources on the California State PTA website, many of which are translated, some of which are translated in 6, 8, or 10 languages. So you definitely want to make sure if you're doing any kind of parent education, whether that's a family math night or a family literacy night, that you go check that out, because all those resources are there for you to use. You can email them out, you can print them. There are some really, really great things for our units to use there. We help our parents understand what the local control accountability plan is and the local control funding formula, and we give them tools so that they can better participate in this. This is the way to make sure that your school gets the funding and the programs that they need, and we have some really great training on that. PTA represents all of our members on legislative issues, whether it's locally or in Sacramento or in Washington, D.C. We have advocates at every single level who are making sure that issues pertaining to children and families are being talked about and shared. We have great awards and recognitions that are available. Honorary service awards are just one of them. They allow you to honor those amazing volunteers who are giving their time and talents to your unit. We offer grants and scholarships. A lot of people don't realize that, but state PTA and national PTA offer grants and scholarships that you can apply for your unit or individually. You as a member or your teachers at your school, counselors, librarians, all of those folks can apply for scholarships. And then we also have what are called membership perks, and you can find those on both the California State PTA website and the national website. Those are things like discounts on rental cars, or for those cool little like veggie delivery boxes, and going to Legoland, and really fun things that you can check out on our website. So there are a bunch of benefits to being a PTA member. As Sue told you about earlier, there is convention once a year, every year, for both state and national. And they offer training, networking, speakers, a chance to meet with vendors, a chance to do the business of the association, vote on who the next leaders are. Oh my gosh, so many great things happen at convention. So we highly encourage you to have convention as a budget line in your budget, because you want to send your board-elect so that they can network with other leaders, meet the state leaders, so that they can have their voice counted and vote on resolutions, bylaw changes, legislation platforms, vote on the new officers for the PTA. All of these things we highly encourage you to do, and check it out, because oftentimes council and district do have scholarships as well to help offset the costs for convention. So don't forget to look into that. Our convention this year is happening May 13th through 16th. That is the actual business of the association are happening on those days. And then we have over 60 workshops. Yes, you heard me correctly, 60 workshops that will start streaming on May 3rd. And you will have access to them for 3 months after convention is over. So if you really want to do some extra training, if you want to get inspired by people, and we not only have things about positions like how to be a great parliamentarian, but we have parenting issues, talking about teen driving, talking about health issues with your children, talking about, well, I have to mention social media and communications and public speaking. We are also, our family engagement group is doing a screenagers screening, as well as talking with one of the producers. So we have amazing things happening this year at convention. So make sure you are signing up. And I think it is now time for Erin to start talking about our finances.
All right, thank you, Heather. So finances. So PTAs are public charities. Public charities cannot carry activities are not permitted under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. As a public charity, you are eligible to receive tax deductible contributions. You are eligible, you're exempt, I'm sorry, from paying federal and state taxes. You have to file your taxes annually. Funds cannot be used to benefit a private person. I'm going back a second just to being exempt from taxes. This does not mean that you are exempt from paying sales tax. We have had some questions come up recently that as a PTA, do we have to pay sales tax on certain items? Yes, you do. We are, we're an entity that doesn't have to pay our federal taxes, but we still have to pay the sales tax. We are not a retailer in which we are reselling things. I know sometimes that happens in our PTAs, but as a rule, yes, we still pay the sales tax. Additionally, we are non-commercial, which means may not endorse any commercial entity or engage in activity that's not related to promoting the purpose of PTA. So what that means is that you have an event and, you know, the pizza guy down the street, whoever pizza place you guys pick, donates their pizzas to your event and you want to thank them. You can't go out and tell your membership, hey, you know, so-and-so is great. You have to support so-and-so. But what you can say is, thank you, so-and-so, for your donation, you know, towards our event. They donated so many pizzas. So we're not endorsing them, but we're thanking them for their contribution. So fiduciary as a PTA, PTA members, supporters, donors, trusts, officers, we all carry out the purpose of PTA. We protect the assets of the organization, including our cash, our physical property, our volunteers, and our reputation. We disperse assets to meet the needs of all children and members served by the PTA. We comply with our federal and state laws. We want to make sure we remain transparent and that we're continuing the business of the association. The reason why that nomination committee is so important because we want to make sure that only those on our boards are highly trusted members of PTA and our fiduciary officers. So these are the 10 financial controls for PTA. Just some of the things that have been set for us to kind of guide us and follow, you know, help us follow. Association members, we elect a treasurer and other financial officers annually. The association approves all PTA programs, activities, fundraisers, etc. We adopt and monitor the PTA budget as an association, approving the changes to it. Always two people count money at all times. We'll get into that a little bit more. We follow, following the approval of the association and the executive board. President and secretary will sign a payment authorization form for each and every expenditure. Check signers are not related by blood and marriage or reside in the same household. 2 check signers sign every check. The auditor and another trained member open and inspect bank statements. They sign and date them. There's annual reports and budget updates and things like that we do at our executive and e-board or association e-board meetings. And PTA boards order, an audit, happens twice a year, mid-year audit and the end of year audit. And those are both reported back to the executive board and association. So your checks and balances, you have your annual financial report. And this report is the last report that a treasurer does at the end of the year before their term is done for the fiscal year. So in June, they will prepare the annual financial report. And it's just a recap of all the expenses that have happened within that year and all the income. So it's just a total report of your entire year financially. There's an annual budget, which is your living and breathing document, is how we refer to it, something that we are constantly modifying and changing with the approval of the association. You set your budget up at the beginning of the year. Actually, you would be setting it up kind of now to start your next year off. And that is a guide for how you're going to spend or use the finances that are coming through. Again, the audit report done twice a year and is presented to your association. You have a workers' compensation form that's filled out once a year, usually in November or December. That is now a digital form, which makes life so much easier. And that we are always reporting on workers' comp the prior year, the prior year, because we want to report on what has been done. And that's, you're just reporting on if you had any employees. Most of us do not. So it's a zero that we paid a zero pay on the form, and then you submit it. But of course, we'll guide everyone through those when that time comes. You have tax returns. You have your form 990, that's your federal return that is filed with the IRS. The form 199 is your state return that's filed with the Franchise Tax Board. Your RF1 is your charitable trust form, and that is filed with the Attorney General. All charities, PTA or not, file RF1s as a charitable organization. And then you have a CTTR1, which if you are a unit that makes under $50,000 and you do not use a CPA to file your taxes, this is a form that we have to fill out now. It's basically the Attorney General's form of a of a treasurer's report. It's their version of a treasurer's report, just one other area where they want to make sure that we're being responsible with our money, that we're using our finances the way that we should be as a nonprofit. So the CTTR1, again, is for any unit that makes under $50,000 a year annually. And then for some units, we do have a couple units in our council that are incorporated. So if you are incorporated, and that I believe is Newhall and Castaic, you will file a statement of information with the Secretary of State. That's done every other year, depending on the year in which you were incorporated. So if you're incorporated on even year, every even year at the end of the year in December, you will file a statement of information, or before. You can file it when you file your taxes, but it's due in December. And then if you were incorporated on an odd year, you would file that statement on an odd year. Anytime you have a check signer or financial officer, or your treasurer, if you have a financial secretary, your president, anyone that's a check signer, if they resign early from their position, then an audit must be done. It needs to be done by council. So that's just a good thing to remember, that we have any officers that leave that were check signers, an audit needs to be conducted by council. So these are some red flags. I will not sit here and read every bullet point for you. These are found, you can get a whole list of this on California PTA website, capta.org. But these are just some things that we wanted to point out, that should you see them, that it could mean that something is, it's just a red flag of things that might not be following proper procedure. It doesn't mean that you're in trouble if these things are happening, but it's just to help guide us so that we don't have an issue come up to where there might be some mismanagement or some inappropriate activity. So, not approving your budget or calendar, not having, things aren't signed, your authorizations aren't signed, checks aren't being signed by two people, basically the things that we went over and more. So money counting, this is going to vary a little bit from site to site, from unit to unit, but basically you have a minimum of 2 people counting at all times. Traditionally, I like to do 2 people counting, and then the treasurer receives as the third counter. But at least 2 people are counting, and that's an insurance regulation. One should be an elected officer and the other a board member. You both must be PTA members in order to count. Funds should be deposited immediately or as soon as possible. If you cannot deposit them immediately, they should be stored in a safe at school or your own safe. They do not get taken home with you. That would disqualify them from being covered under insurance should something happen. And I think we're over to Sue.
Standards for PTA fundraising. Fundraising is a method in which PTAs raise money to finance their programs, projects, and activities. Fundraising must support the goals of PTA and be related to the educational and charitable and philanthropic purposes of your tax-exempt organization. When planning the year's activities, PTAs should use the 3-to-1 rule. And we get a lot of questions about the 3-to-1 rule. This is a recommendation. There should be at least 3 non-fundraising activities for every 1 fundraiser. So we told you earlier that PTAs are not a fundraising organization. PTA others, foundations, those are typically more of what are described as fundraising organizations. PTA is an advocacy organization for the purpose of enriching the lives of children, families, education at schools, and community. So when you're fundraising, and it's like, you've got 6 or 8 of them, the fundraising programs are meant to support the activities, programs, and projects that you want to do at your school through PTA. And for every 1 fundraiser, you should be able to host 3 activities. Selecting fundraising activities. So there are several things that need to happen when you're looking at different fundraising organizations. One is that the organization that you seek should follow the same mission statement and purposes of PTA. They should be educational, charitable, philanthropic. The proceeds of the fundraiser should be designated for the approved projects that meet the purposes of the PTA. Do not hold a fundraiser if the PTA has not determined how the funds will be spent. So when you are going to offer a fundraising program, it's important to let your members know and anyone that they associate with who might purchase things from your fundraising program, what the money goes to. So you should make sure the organization is compatible with the missions of your PTA, and that you let your community and PTA members know what the purpose is for the fundraising. Does the PTA project violate PTA's non-commercial policy? We hope not. So you need to, I suggest that you read the CAPTA PTA toolkit under non-commercial policy and make sure that your PTA aligns with those philosophies. Now, when you select your fundraising activities, you should pick multiple vendors to make a decision between. And then you need to bring those vendors to, if you're the fundraising chair or the VP for fundraising or VP for ways and means, whatever you call it, at your PTA, you bring those recommendations first to your executive board so you can hash out whether or not the fundraising organization meets the needs of PTA. And from there, your executive board will make a recommendation of companies to your PTA. If we're meeting in person, you may certainly invite the vendor to attend your meeting so they can present their product. The other thing too is when you're planning your fundraising activity, sometimes a parent might say, hey, I have a business. I sell Tupperware. I sell Pampered Chefs. I have a t-shirt business. I'd like to be able to do a give back to your PTA as well because I have a child there. So when that happens, it's extremely important for you to keep that parent's business in the same category as the other businesses you're looking at. because otherwise there could be a conflict of interest. So anybody who's a parent, grandparent, some related community member or family member, they need to go through the same process of selection that other vendors do for your PTA. Also, you need to make sure you have enough volunteers to manage and implement the fundraising activity. And if you don't do it. Okay, so that goes with anything. If you don't have enough volunteers to stage an event, then you might not be able to do it, because what we don't want to happen is that the nucleus of your leadership burn out. Next slide.
And Sue, you're so right about that. So that's important to keep in mind all the time. But as Leslie pointed out before, we have a committee for fundraising. This isn't just one person doing it by themselves. And so there are guidelines for your fundraising committee. It could be called Ways and Means. It could be called a lot of different things. But as always, fundraising does not get to make determinations on their own. They have to take that to the executive board and the association for approval. This is super important. Speaking as a secretary, you have to have the business name in your minutes. So if we are going to use, a specific catalog company or a certain vendor for t-shirts or whatever it might be, we need that vendor's name in our minutes for insurance. Part of the committee's task is to find those volunteers. Like Sue said, you got to make sure you got the people before you sign those contracts. Have people take shifts or give them tasks to do or jobs, assign things so that you know that you have that project covered. You are allowed to solicit donations. You can ask vendors for either things to use as prizes or as raffle things for your teachers for teacher appreciation. So definitely keep those lines of communication open between you and the vendors. And you need, this is super important, to check with your school prior to doing your fundraising to make sure that you are meeting all of their requirements as well, especially if you're going to do something like a walkathon or a fun run. You need to make sure that you are partnering with them to make sure that the facilities and all the paperwork that they need is done as well. As I said before you sign a contract, the association must be, they must vote on it and it must reflect in your minutes, but you do need to sign a contract. Don't just have this verbal agreement like, hey, Aaron and I talked about it and we agreed and this was all great. No, we need things in writing. We need things to fall back on. And so you need to make sure that there is some sort of a paper trail to follow along with your vendors. They might need permits for things like harvest festivals or spring carnivals. So make sure if you need a fire permit or any kind of permit from the city that you are getting those things. We also need to make sure that every vendor we work with has the proper liability insurance. So while we carry our own insurance, we need to make sure that they have their own as well. And we usually require that our vendors sign a hold harmless agreement with us. Some school districts also ask the vendors to sign their own hold harmless agreement. So you need to check in with your district to make sure that those things happen. All right, I'm going to do this one and then Leslie gets to talk about raffles because I know that she's really excited about that. But I want to talk a little bit about the fundraising committee again. I want to remind you that the chair, whether that's the vice president of Ways and Means or whether that's the chair of the fundraising committee, they need to share all of this with both the executive board and the association before they spend funds. They need to read the contracts, but guess what? They don't get to sign contracts on their own. As Erin will tell us in her finance training, I'm sure, is that all contracts must be signed by the president and at least one other officer. So the fundraising chair cannot sign anything by themselves. In PTA, we always do things in twos, so we always have two officers sign agreements. Like I said, don't sign anything until the association has approved it, because otherwise, Heather Apolito, if I've signed the contract, I now become personally liable, and I don't want that. Again, there are lots of procedures, not only California State PTA procedures, but also our insurance. So make sure that you call AIM, our insurance, and ask those questions. They will give you all of the resources that you need to make sure that you are in line with insurance. Make sure that after the event, you are requesting reimbursement in a timely manner. I know that Erin has been a treasurer for many years, and there's nothing more annoying than getting reimbursement requests months and months and months after the event. Some units even limit asking for that reimbursement for 30 days. So check your bylaws, because you might be out of luck if you wait too long. Never, this is so important, pay with cash. When you are using a vendor, write them a check. That way there is a paper trail. If we just pull money out of the till and we hand it to them, there is no paper trail whatsoever to follow along. So you can either pay with check beforehand or after, but make sure that there are contracts, receipts, invoices, and that you pay with a check. And then afterwards, you want to make sure that you do a complete report of what happened. What vendors did you use? How was the event? How was it set up? Put a map in there, because what we don't want is the person who comes after you to have to completely reinvent the wheel. We've all been there, where the previous person left and took everything with them, and now we have to start from scratch. That's not fair. So in your procedure book, whether it's digital or whether it's an actual physical binder, make sure that you do a summary of the fundraiser. How did it go? What recommendations would you make for next time? What lessons did you learn? We've all been there, sitting in the middle of the NPR crying because something went wrong. Write that down so that the person who comes after you won't also be sitting in the middle of the NPR crying because the same thing happened to them. So make sure that you pass your knowledge on to the next. And this is important not just for fundraising, but for every position, but it's especially important for fundraising. So Leslie, you get the very exciting topic of raffles and drawings.
Why, thank you, Heather. One really popular way of fundraising is to have a raffle. And if you at your unit decide that you do want to do a raffle at some point during the school year, you are required by law, by California law, to have a raffle permit. On this slide, you can see the Attorney General's website listed there. That is where you will find all of the information on how to obtain a raffle permit and what the rules are regarding raffles. You can see there that you need to complete the registration form and submit it every single year. So you need to fill out a new one every single year. So it should be one of the first things that you do as a new unit in the late summer. Fill out that raffle form and submit it to the Attorney General. There's a small fee associated with that. Then, and here's a key that many units forget, at the end of the year, you are required to fill out a raffle report form for the Attorney General. They require you to report on what raffles you held in that prior year. Even if you did not hold a raffle, you are required to fill out the raffle report form. So that's a really easy thing to fill out if you did not hold a raffle. Just say that you did not hold a raffle and you sign the form and you submit it. Otherwise, you just fill out the information required and it's not really that hard. But you do need to have those things done. On there, it lists the different types of raffles that are included. One thing to note, in California, 50-50 raffles are illegal. So do not hold a 50-50 raffle. Here we have a little bit of information on PTA funds versus school funds. This is something that a lot of PTAs kind of encounter and we get a lot of questions about. So remember that as a PTA, the only money that should be going into your bank account is PTA money. So if you have other organizations on your campus, such as like a student council or maybe the staff runs a sixth grade committee on their own that is not affiliated with your PTA. If they have funds that they are collecting for fundraisers of their own, they may not give you the money to deposit into your account for PTA and then you write them a check. That is not allowed. Those things have to remain separate. If you do that, it's considered commingling of funds, and that is illegal. So all of the money that gets deposited into your account needs to be PTA money, not any other organization on your campus or outside of your campus. PTA funds are private, school funds are public.
All right. PTA finances, two sides to this coin. So encumbering PTA with expenses. PTA funds are spent according to the wishes of the association, depending on your event or the things that you're providing. Monies earned during the school year should be spent on those children, unless there's a large project, and that way you can, with the association approval, decide to fundraise and continue to fundraise for a bigger project, but that's not usually the norm. Usually you want to spend your funds within the year that you are fundraising them. Principal superintendents cannot expect or require PTA to pay for expenses. We are not a bank account for your schools. So again, everything that you do has to have association approval. You don't want to, like it says, encumber PTA with expenses that aren't really beneficial to the children and the school within that year. We're not a fundraising machine. PTA often gets confused with being a fundraising organization, and that's not our goal and our mission. We fundraise to support the programs that we are doing, but that is not our main focus. Gifts to school. When we gift to school, there needs to be a purpose behind it. We can gift money for fine art programs, for field trips, assemblies, different things like that. The money is gifted with a fiduciary agreement saying that we gift these funds for that specific purpose. And if those funds are not used for that purpose, they get to be returned to the PTA. So it puts a little ownership on the district that they're going to use the funds that we gift them for those purposes or those activities or whatever you want to call them, specifically for them. We are not an employer, so we don't hire staff, which means we don't pay for teachers or part-time staff that work on the school campuses. That's not part of what we gift our money for. So.
Okay. Some other things that do come up that you might want to spend some money on are district brunch, council installation, and convention, which we've talked about already a little bit. Those district brunches and council installation dinners are meetings, and they are appropriate PTA expenses. Just make sure that you are including them in your budget and that you're getting that approved by the association. And you can always invite your administrators and or teachers to join you for any of those events, as long as you have that approval to take those people with you. Here's a big one. Gift cards and personal gifts are not allowed to be purchased with PTA funds. You can never, ever, ever use any PTA money to purchase gift cards or gifts for any one person. There are other ways that you can do this to thank volunteers or staff. You can have a breakfast because those funds could come out of hospitality. You can give them a certificate, which funds would come out of office supplies. You can give them an award, an honorary service award, as long as you have all those things in your budget. One little side note about gift cards. What you are allowed to do is to take donations of gift cards. So if you put out a letter to your school community, or if your board as a whole just wanted to pitch in and purchase gift cards to be used as thank yous to staff or during staff appreciation week or something like that. As long as those things are donated, you can give them away. You cannot use money that your PTA has raised to purchase the gift cards.
That is really good advice. We cannot say that enough. You cannot do that. All right. So really quickly, we wanted to give you a very quick summary of meetings and motions, or the basics of parliamentary law, before we leave today with this. So the basic principles of parliamentary law are order. So in our meetings, having some procedures in place helps with order. We're only going to consider one motion at a time, only one piece of business at a time, only let one person speak at a time. Otherwise, we have total anarchy. We want to have equal opportunity with partiality to none. So any member can propose motions, participate in the debate, vote, share, but we do not exclude anybody. Now, here's the little asterisk. Remember, to speak in a PTA meeting, you have to be a member. So the equal opportunity is among our members. Justice. We want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to have their rights protected, to be able to participate and be a part of the process. Parliamentary procedures allow that the right of the minority is heard, but the majority decides. And this is really important. So following some of the parliamentary rules helps you to conduct your meetings fairly, so that we have that process in place, that the minority is heard, but the majority decides. All right, so this is something that we see time and time again when we sit in on meetings that our folks need a refresher course on. So when it comes time to make a motion, any motion, you first need to obtain the floor. And that's a really fancy way of saying just have the chair call on you. So you put your hand up, or you stand up, or you go to the microphone, whatever it is, you obtain the floor. The chair of the meeting recognizes you and says, "Yes, Heather, what can I do for you?" And then you get to make the motion. Now, this is one of those moments where, if you've ever been to a meeting with me, you know that I will yell it from the back. There is a proper way to make the motion. So don't say, "I make a motion to," it is, "I move." So I move that we have the Harvest Festival on October 26th. You make your motion. Before you get to talk about it or debate it or discuss it, there has to be a second. Anyone in the meeting can second your motion. A second doesn't mean that they agree with you. It just means that they believe there is value in discussing what you have to say. Now, if you say something very left field, like, I move that weekends be abolished, I don't think you're going to get a second on that, because that's not really going to be popular. But even if you're saying something that's slightly, off topic, if someone finds value in debate or discussion, then they are going to second it. After that happens, the chair says, "Okay, so the motion on the floor is to have the Harvest Festival on October 26th. Would you like to speak to your motion?" And then I get to start talking about the rationale, why I think it should be on that date, and all the amazing things that are going to happen. And then after that, the debate goes one person for, one person against, back and forth. A lot of units have rules for debate, so you can only have maybe 3 or 4 people speak on each side. And then after a certain amount of time, debate is closed. So what we don't want to do is for the next 3 hours to be debating the Harvest Festival. Nobody has time for that. So you might want to limit debate to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or 3 speakers for, 3 speakers against. Once we've hit that, we're done. After debate is closed, we put the question to, we determine what's going to happen. We vote on it. So we call the question is really what that's called, not put the question. We call the question. We vote on it. So the chair then says all those in favor, all those opposed, or we do a ballot, or we do any of those things. And then the chair says the ayes have it. The Harvest Festival will be at, October 26th here on campus. So There are 8 steps to making a motion. There can be amendments along the way. So during debate, Leslie could say, you know what, I totally am in favor of having the Harvest Festival, but I don't think October 26th is the right day. We've never had it on a Saturday. Let's move it to the 25th. That's a Friday. That's when our families are all used to having it. And then we debate that motion, that amendment, before we do the whole motion. And then we can amend the original motion. That might be a little bit more information than you needed, but you do need to remember, get the floor, make your motion, say, I move. There is a second that has to happen, debate and discussion, and then there is a vote where the result is announced. Like I said, there are ways to change a motion. We can insert things. We can delete things. That's what striking is. We can substitute things. These are all things that happen, but usually if you're doing things in committee, they don't normally happen as often. If we're doing things completely off the floor and like Leslie hasn't talked to anybody about this and she's just kind of bringing this off the top of her head, that's when we have more likelihood of having to amend a motion. But if you've done your homework, if your committee is doing what they should be doing, we don't really necessarily have much cause to amend. As I said before, there are lots of different ways to vote, and I'm not going to go through those again because I already did that. Again, it is important to note, you cannot vote by proxy. If you do anything that is in violation of your bylaws, it automatically becomes null and void. So make sure that either you or your parliamentarian are well-versed enough in your bylaws to make sure that you are not doing anything that violates those. And as we've said many times throughout this training video, if you are not a member, you do not get to make a motion, you do not get to debate or discuss, and you do not get to vote. So you need to make sure you have your membership list handy, because if you have someone who stands up and makes a motion and you don't realize that they're not a member, that's problematic, right? We need to make sure that everyone who is making a motion, debating and voting is a member. All right, Sue, back to you.
So we're going to wrap it up and want to say thank you for listening and watching today's training for PTA. Please tell all your friends on your board that this training is available, and listen to it more than once, because you learn something different every time, because your focus is going to be different. And when you want to contact us, because you're going to have some amazing questions now and all through the year, you can see our emails right here. And remember, you don't work alone. We work together in PTA as a collaborative team, and your executive board doesn't make the decisions. That power rests with your association, your membership. The board makes recommendations based on the knowledge of the community and what they think the community would like to see and do. So again, we want you to go into this with an open heart and an open mind. There's nothing about PTA you can't learn about, and there's nothing about PTA you can't do. And if you keep the focus on the kids, you will always be in the right. So thank you so much. Thank you, Leslie, Heather, and Aaron, for your time. And good luck, everyone.